on Zoom for a discussion with Dr. Paul Offit. He is the acclaimed virologist from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. We had him last year. He was spectacular. He's going to tell us all about what's happening in the country right now with immunizations and infectious diseases. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Paul Offit. Thank you for joining us again, Dr. Offit.
Thank you so much. You can hear me okay? We're good? All right, great. So first I want to thank Julia Vancherry for allowing me to switch my talk only a few days before I was to give it. It's just that there was an event that occurred on August the 10th that I've been getting a lot of questions about, that the media has been overwhelmed with, and I thought it would be a good idea to talk about this. So on August the 10th of this year, 5 days ago, President Trump issued an executive order. The title of that executive order was Delivering Gold Standard Childhood Vaccine Recommendations for Americans. So let's take a closer look at what those gold standard vaccine recommendations are. Excuse me, I have a cold, but I'm going to live through this, so we're good. Now, you should know that this executive order does not have the force of law behind it. What all these recommendations are is that the executive order is asking states to consider implementing these changes. But there is no, it's up to the states whether or not to do that. I can tell you that in Pennsylvania, in our Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Governor Shapiro has said very clearly that we are going to ignore this. But I suspect many states might not. And so let's go through what is in this executive order. So one thing that President Trump and Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is asking us to do is to separate the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, this combination vaccine, into its three component parts. So instead of getting a dose of vaccine at 10 to 15 months of age, and instead of getting a dose of vaccine at a second dose at 4 to 6 years of age, that we would get six shots instead of 2. So what's behind that? Let's go back to the beginning, because this is like I'm having post-traumatic stress disorder from the fact that we went through this 25 years ago, and now we're going through it again. So in February 1998, excuse me, Andrew Wakefield, a British intestinal surgeon, published a paper in The Lancet claiming that the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine caused autism. Now, it was events that occurred the next day that leads us to where we are now. But let me tell you what happened in that study, or what was proposed in that study. Andrew Wakefield said that because the MMR vaccine was given as a combination vaccine instead of separately, that had allowed the immune system to be suppressed. Now, he could have done studies to see whether or not there was an adequate response to common antigens to prove his point that the immune system was suppressed, but he didn't. He then said that because the immune system was suppressed because we'd given these vaccines in combination, that allowed the measles vaccine component to travel to the intestine and reproduce itself in intestinal epithelial cells and damage the intestinal mucosal surface. Now, he biopsied all of these children. There were 8 children in that vaccine who'd received 8 children in that study or case analysis who had received the vaccine, and he'd biopsied all of those 8 children. So he could have easily done the studies that he was saying was the problem. He could have easily seen whether or not by PCR, polymerase chain reaction, that there was evidence for measles vaccine virus in these intestinal epithelial cells. He didn't do that. He then said that because the intestine was damaged, that allowed for as yet unidentified encephalopathic or brain-damaging proteins to enter the circulation, travel to the brain, cross an intact blood-brain barrier, and cause autism. Now, he sort of postulated what those could be. Maybe it's casein, maybe it's gluten, kind of appealing to the Whole Foods crowd. And he actually did studies by taking sera from children who attended his son's 5th grade birthday party, which was highly unethical as a control, but he couldn't really find what that was. So basically, he proposed a series of impossible events for which he had no proof. It was sort of like the Red Queen in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, imagining 6 impossible things before breakfast. He basically imagined 3 impossible things for which he had no proof. It should have never been published. I mean, it was just the musings of a man for which he had no evidence. And all he showed was 8 children who had received the MMR vaccine, who then within a month developed signs and symptoms of autism, although it turns out he had misrepresented clinical data, he had misrepresented biological data, and in fact, at least one of those children developed signs and symptoms of autism before they ever got that vaccine. So what happened the next day is Andrew Wakefield appeared at a press conference where he said that if you want to lessen the risk of autism, what you need to do is you need to separate that vaccine into its 3 component parts. That's where this came from. Now, Wakefield eventually lost his license to practice medicine. So he came to the United States, went to Florida, where he worked for a group called Thoughtful House, which sort of had these promised cures for neurological or neurodevelopmental diseases like autism. It was basically this bogus sort of group, for which he fit in well. But while he was there, he became friends with Dave Weldon, who was a Republican congressman from Florida. Now, Weldon was on the Appropriations Committee, the Senate Appropriations Committee, whatever. But in any case, the CDC gets its money from Congress. And so what he did was he basically made us, because I was on the advisory committee for immunization practices between 98 and 2003, he made us vote on whether or not we should separate that vaccine into its 3 component parts. Walt Ornstein was the head of what was then called the National Immunization Program, and believe me, he didn't want to do this. He didn't want to make us have a vote for something that was utterly ridiculous. I mean, at that point now, you're a couple of years later, there was clear evidence that you were no more likely to develop autism if you'd received the MMR vaccine or not. Since that time, there have been more than 24 studies in 7 different countries on 3 different continents involving hundreds of thousands of children and tens of millions of dollars to show that you are no more likely to get autism if you got that vaccine than if you didn't. I mean, it's fair enough to ask that question, right? My child was fine. They got a vaccine. Now they're not fine. They have signs and symptoms of autism. Could the vaccine have done it? Fair enough. It's a scientific question. It can be answered in a scientific venue, and it has been answered in a scientific venue again and again and again. And what is so frustrating about this is that despite all this evidence, despite all this attempts to answer questions, and you have to give credit to the academic community, the pediatric community, the scientific community for spending the time and money to answer this question. And yet still you have people like President Trump or like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. who just refuse to believe it. That's what's the most frustrating. Now, the MMR vaccine has not been available as 3 separate vaccines since 2009. And the companies have made it clear, at least for now, both Merck and GlaxoSmithKline, who make the combination measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, that they have no plans to offer that as 3 separate vaccines because there's no reason to, because the vaccine is safe when given in combination. But we'll see how this plays out. I think the other thing that's unconscionable about this is over the past year and a half, we've had the biggest measles outbreak in this country in more than 30 years. We had 3 people die of measles in 2025. 2 of them were healthy little girls, unvaccinated little girls in West Texas, one a 6-year-old, one an 8-year-old. We're having continued outbreaks of measles. We will no doubt lose our measles elimination status. And to do this, to cast doubt on measles-containing vaccine in the midst of our biggest epidemic in more than 3 decades is unbelievably unconscionable. It's just hard to watch this. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the Secretary of Health and Human Services. He is not being paid $500,000 a year by Children's Health Defense to represent anti-vaccine activists anymore. He's being paid by you and me, taxpayers, to represent the health of this country. And he's not doing that. Okay. The second thing that's part of this executive order, this gold standard childhood vaccine schedule, is that we should space out vaccines so that children don't get more than 1 shot at a visit. And that's what's at the heart of this. I mean, at this press conference, Stephen Miller spoke, because Stephen Miller and Donald Trump and RFK Jr. all, have an expertise in medicine and science. So why shouldn't they be leading this? Sorry, I'm going to try and be less sarcastic. This is hard for me, but I'm feeling better. Okay, this helps me get through this. So he said, did Stephen Miller, I have young children. I'm watching them get shot after shot after shot. How can this not overwhelm their immune system? How can it not cause unwanted inflammation? How can it not cause chronic diseases? This from Stephen Miller. So let's take a look at this for a minute. Donald Trump was born in 1946. Both Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and I were born in the early 1950s. What the three of us have in common is that we were all given two vaccines as children. We were given the smallpox vaccine, and we were given the diphtheria, tetanus, whole cell pertussis vaccine. Now, the smallpox vaccine is the largest of the mammalian viruses. The point being, it's not the number of shots that you get. It's the number of immunological components in those shots. That's what Stephen Miller's talking about. That's what RFK Jr. is talking about. You're overwhelming or perturbing a child's immune system by giving all these shots. But it's what's in the shots that matter. So the smallpox vaccine that we got, smallpox is the largest of the mammalian viruses. It has about 200 separate smallpox proteins or immunological components. The vaccine, the pertussis vaccine, was a whole-killed bacterial vaccine. It's the only time we ever gave a whole-killed bacterial vaccine in this country, and we gave it up until the late 1990s. Bacteria are bigger than viruses. The number of immunological components in that vaccine, bacterial proteins, bacterial polysaccharides, was about 3,200. So between those two vaccines, both Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Donald Trump, and I got about 3,200 to 3,400 separate immunological components. That's 20 times more than my grandchildren are currently receiving. 20 times more, because they receive, if you add up all 17 vaccines that my grandchildren are receiving, it adds up to about 160 immunological components, right? 3,200 versus 160, because we make safer, purer vaccines, because we've had advances in protein chemistry, in protein purification, in recombinant DNA technology, which allows us to make safer, purer vaccines. The pertussis vaccine no longer contains 3,000 plus immunological components. It contains 1 to 5 immunological components. So that's what matters. So the notion that children are being overwhelmed doesn't make sense. The other thing is that if you space out vaccines, which is what this executive order is asking people to do, all you're doing is increasing the period of time during which children are susceptible to vaccine-preventable diseases for no benefit. So again, like the MMR recommendation, this makes no sense. Also, another thing is there's this notion that if you get sort of 2 shots or 3 shots or 4 shots at one time, that's more stressful than getting 1 shot. So space it out. That's also not true. There was a study done looking at cortisol secretion as a measure of stress to see whether or not you had a greater amount of cortisol secretion after getting 2 shots at the same time than getting 1 shot. And the answer, it was the same, which is to say you're maximally stressed out at 1 shot. So it probably makes more sense to give 2, 3, 4 shots at a time than to space them all out, because then all you're doing is delaying the vaccines. You're giving them later in life, which means that children are more likely to remember that. And I just watched my 2-month-old granddaughter get her vaccines, and the nurse was great. I mean, he came in and he just gave, shot, 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 shot. I mean, she was not happy about this, but I don't think it would have been worse if she got shot, wait, a month, give another shot, wait another month. Plus, I got to hold her when she got her rotavirus vaccine, which was like a circle of life moment for me. She's ridiculously cute, by the way, unfairly cute. I think you should know that. I'm happy to show pictures later if anybody wants to see that. Okay, the other thing that is in this gold standard vaccine schedule from our president is that he wants to change the number of routinely recommended vaccines. To have sort of a core group of 10 vaccines, and then the other vaccines are sort of either just for high-risk groups, like the hepatitis A vaccine, hepatitis B vaccine, the meningococcal vaccine, or to be shared clinical decision-making. First of all vaccines are shared clinical decision-making. We always talk to parents, the pediatrician does, as we're administering vaccines. No one is forced to get a vaccine. You can always choose not to get a vaccine. I mean, you may have to pay some societal price for that, like you may not be able to go to the school you want to go to, but for the most part, We don't have compulsory vaccination in this country. I think the only time there was compulsory vaccination in this country for children occurred in Philadelphia in 1991 and 1992. And that was because there were two fundamentalist churches, Faith Tabernacle and First Century Gospel, that had big families, big schools, and didn't vaccinate their kids. And so we had a huge measles outbreak in 91, 92. Now, this is, they're almost 30 years into the availability of a measles vaccine, which made it all the worse. But we had 1,400 cases of measles and 9 deaths in our city in one winter. That scared people. Schools were canceling trips to the city. People were afraid to come into work in the city. Imagine that, 1,400 cases, 9 deaths in one city. And so what we did was we got a series of court orders that eventually led to the 4th court order, which was these children were compelled to be vaccinated. Now, what was interesting is those two schools were choosing basically a religious exemption. And we had a religious exemption in our Commonwealth and had it. So what they were doing by not vaccinating was perfectly legal. And so one of the pastors at the church, a guy named Charles Reinert, went to the American Civil Liberties Union and asked him to represent him and his congregation for doing something that was perfectly legal. So everybody assumed that the ACLU would represent him because the ACLU seems to be perfectly willing to represent unpopular causes, like neo-Nazis marching down the streets of Skokie, Illinois. I mean, they don't have a problem doing that. So everybody assumed they would do this, but they didn't. And there was a woman I think her name was Judy Levitt, who was head of the chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union at the time. And she said something I will never forget because this is going to come up even with this executive order. She said, while it is your right to martyr yourself to your religion, it is not your right to martyr your child to your religion. And I think that is absolutely true because part of this executive order is I think that what President Trump wants to do in this order, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wants to do, is I think they want to use the power of the federal government to withhold funds in states that don't have a religious exemption, to force them to have a religious exemption. That's essentially what happened recently in Mississippi. When Mississippi didn't have a religious exemption or a philosophical exemption, had immunization rates in the 99.5% range. They had the highest immunization rates in the country and, not shockingly, had the lowest rates of vaccine-preventable diseases. I mean, this is a state that's not necessarily known for its amazing public health achievements, yet this was one. And so when they introduced a religious exemption, there was a dramatic increase in whooping cough cases and a whooping cough death. So they're right then to allow their child to die in the name of their religion, which I just think is unconscionable. It's the opposite of a religious act. I mean, religions teach us to care about our families, to care about our children, to care about our neighbors. That is at the heart of religion. Love the stranger. So why is it that this somehow is called religious in any case? So the other thing that, okay, so getting back to this no longer having a routine recommendation for 17 vaccines. So again, some of these diseases for which are sort of moved into the high risk category, like hepatitis B or hepatitis A or meningococcus, everybody's at risk. I mean, there are higher risk groups, but everyone's at risk. That's why we have a routine recommendation. The other thing they have is, in addition to they say that for the rotavirus vaccine, the COVID vaccine, and the flu vaccine, that they move into the sort of shared clinical decision-making. Now, first of all, again, it's always shared clinical decision-making. But by saying that, what you're saying is it's optional. You can reasonably choose not to get those vaccines. That's not a reasonable choice. It's not, because what those 3 viruses, rotavirus, flu, COVID, all have in common is they're all short incubation period mucosal infections. You will never eliminate those viruses. Even if everybody was vaccinated every year with vaccines against those 3 diseases, you will still see those viruses circulate. I mean, while we've largely eliminated the 55,000 to 70,000 hospitalizations from severe diarrhea caused by rotavirus, that virus still circulates. I mean, occasionally we see children with mild gastroenteritis in our emergency department. So a choice not to get a vaccine is a choice to take a very real risk to have that infection. And sorry, I had to do a taped interview yesterday for the Today Show tomorrow, and what the interview asked me is, so when you have shared clinical decision making, don't you think it's reasonable that someone could choose not to get a vaccine? No, I don't. I think anybody who's fully informed about vaccines will get them every time. I mean, I would argue I'm relatively informed about vaccines. My children are fully vaccinated. My 4 grandchildren, again, ridiculously cute, are fully vaccinated because I think my children are informed about vaccines. To choose not to get it means at some level you're lacking a critical amount of information. It's not a good choice. I mean, I just got a call yesterday from a physician in Pennsylvania who asked me, Ted, he was taking care of a child, a girl, who had measles encephalitis. So unvaccinated measles encephalitis. Did I think ribavirin could treat that? No, I don't. There's no evidence that ribavirin treats it. There's nothing to treat it. Here's a girl who very likely may end up brain damaged and possibly dead from a completely preventable disease. I mean, it's so hard to watch this. Okay, I'm feeling better. Thanks. The other thing that is in this executive order by our president is that he recommends that we consider an alternative to aluminum. I tell you, it's hard for me to do this with a straight face. I mean, I don't know if you saw this press conference, but in that press conference, our president said that he saw children get as much as a soda bottle's water worth of or liquid injected into the veins of a child. He saw that. Now, a soda bottle has about 2,000 milliliters, roughly. Now, the amount of vaccine that's given in a single dose for children, for the most part for all vaccines, is 0.5 milliliters. That's 1/10 of a teaspoon. So in other words, 2,000 milliliters is 4,000 times greater than a child would ever get from a vaccine. What is he talking about? I mean, the thing that's the hardest about all this, he's got a press corps standing there asking questions. Why does everybody not burst out laughing at how ridiculous this is? It's embarrassing that you have your president of the United States say that children get a soda bottle's worth of liquid injected into their veins. It's just so hard to watch. In any case, so now he wants us to reevaluate aluminum adjuvants that are in vaccines. Now, aluminum adjuvants have been in vaccines actually since 1926. So we are celebrating our 100th anniversary of aluminum adjuvants in vaccines. Maybe there'll be like an ultra fighting championship match on the White House lawn to celebrate this, but probably not. In any case, so aluminum adjuvants, what do we know about aluminum adjuvants? What aluminum adjuvants allow us to do is give fewer doses of vaccines. It allows us to give a lesser quantity of antigen in the vaccine. And are safe. So first of all, how do we know that we're safe? We know because there was actually an excellent study that was done just recently published in the Annals of Internal Medicine out of Denmark, looking at over a 23-year period at roughly 2+ million children. And it was great because it was actually a dose response curve, which you never get in these kinds of studies. So because it was a 23-year period, they could look at children who either got between 0 and 4.5 milligrams of aluminum salts in vaccines. And then they looked at 50 different disorders or diseases to see whether there was any difference in those who received 0 versus 4.5 milligrams of aluminum adjuvants. And there was no difference, which makes sense because assuming you live on this planet, you are exposed to aluminum all the time. Assuming you drink the water on this planet or anything made from water like infant formula or breast milk, or you eat food on this planet, you will have exponentially more aluminum in your bloodstream from doing that than you would ever get from a vaccine. You'll have roughly 800 milligrams of aluminum in your bloodstream in that first 18 years of life as compared to less than 10 from vaccines. So you wouldn't expect that ever to have been a problem, and that's why it's not a problem. So why would we ever want to change it? And for these companies to do that, they're not going to do it. I mean, if a company, let's say, makes the hepatitis B vaccine with an aluminum adjuvant, they're not going to change that adjuvant because it means an entire new vaccine. For which they would have to spend tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to develop and test to basically compete against themselves. So why would they ever do that? So it's just this sort of pie in the sky recommendation. I think the whole purpose of this, I think Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s whole purpose in this is to create chaos, to create doubt, to create confusion. So people aren't sure what they're supposed to do, which then has it fall to the pediatrician to answer questions. There was actually a great video I wrote about this on a Substack called Collateral Damage that was put out by a pediatrician. And I talked about this one Instagram post that this pediatrician had because it was perfect. She said, I love my patients. I love my parents. I'm happy to answer their questions. I love my job, but it's getting hard to do my job. It's getting hard to answer all these questions. One, because it doesn't give me much more time to talk about other things, all the other anticipatory guidance things I need to do regarding mental health or firearm safety or whatever. And I get home later, and it's just been very hard for me. So I think, and that's RFK Jr.'s goal: create doubt so that we can have a lesser incidence of children getting vaccines. And it's not only measles that this has happened to. We've had almost 290 children die last year of influenza, another 150 or so this year. We haven't seen numbers that big since 2009. Same thing with whooping cough. We're seeing states with whooping cough deaths, Louisiana being one of them, that hadn't seen whooping cough deaths in a while. And so thank you, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Thank you, President Trump, for creating doubt about vaccines and putting children in harm's way. Okay, so I'll finish by saying this, and then there's plenty of time for questions, is that Governor Shapiro said we're going to ignore this. I think it's worth ignoring. And I'm actually not worried so much about the blue states, but I do worry about the red states who may feel there's a desire to find some middle ground with this executive order. I don't think they're going to have much of a choice regarding religious exemptions. I think that it's very likely that you're going to see pretty much every state in this country soon have religious exemptions. I hope I'm wrong, but I think that's possible. But there is no middle ground on any of these recommendations regarding aluminum adjuvants, regarding measles dosing, regarding making these vaccines sort of optional. There's no middle ground there. I mean, our job is to stand up for the science. And there's no science behind these recommendations. It's just made up. Okay. I just lived through this. I've actually had a cold for the last few days, but I've lived through this, which was my goal. And I am happy to answer any questions that you had. If you think that I was wishy-washy and not definitive enough, let me know, and I'll try and be more definitive in the future. Because here's what I'd like to know from you, actually. I would like to know, Louisiana is a red state. How are you guys going to handle this? I'm just curious as to how this plays out, because this is a dangerous game that our president and Secretary of Health and Human Services is playing. It's a dangerous game they're playing with our children's lives, and this is the time to stand up. There is no middle ground in science. I mean, you can have productive discussions about religion or philosophy. It doesn't work that way in science. You're either right or you're wrong about something. I mean, the MMR vaccine is safe in combined form.
If you have a question or comment, please raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone to you so that Dr. Offit can hear.
Thank you, Dr. Offit. My name is Raj Warrior. I have two questions for you. One is a strange question. Are you afraid of being targeted? Because I'm worried about you. Would they come after you from FBI or somebody?
I'm sorry, it was hard for me to understand that
I said
question.
you're so outspoken. Would somebody target you for FBI or Justice Department?
Meaning, do I get targeted?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the Department of Justice apparently isn't only trying to go after people like Adam Schiff, but they do investigate death threats against me. And so I've had 3 death threats over the last 6 months, roughly. I can tell you the names of the people that threatened me. Last name was Allison, one was Humbert, and one was Lamb, Noah Lamb. And so when they make a death threat, what the Department of Justice does is it has to be a legitimate death threat, something I think is real. And then they bring them to court, they indict them, they convict them, and then they ask me to come give a victim impact statement. I mean, it's gone that far. So yes, I get threatened. Do I think people are going to kill me? No. I think if someone's going to kill me, they're not going to give me a heads up first. I just think the goal is to shut me up, to scare me, and I'm just not going to be scared. Sorry.
My second question is, what about our international reputation in the world? We're being looked down upon by many countries as going backwards. Our international reputation.
I'm sorry, so the second part again, in terms of other
our international reputation as a good country for medicine. Is it going down because of
Yeah, I mean, I've had dealing with other countries like France, Spain, et cetera, who call and say, what the hell is going on with your country? Including this most recent executive order. They've asked how that will change the childhood vaccine schedule, this gold standard childhood vaccine schedule. You're right. And the other thing is that I think with the shredding of the National Institutes of Health in terms of grants, you're starting to see a lot of talent leave this country. I think that the future really of vaccine development in this country is not going to be this country. I think it'll be China and to a lesser extent India. That's what people like Stan Plotkin says is going to happen. You're right. It's hard to watch this. I believe we're going to get through this. I do. I'm optimistic, although I am a Philadelphia Eagles season ticket holder, but so, we're all optimistic. But I do think we will get through this because science does win out. It does always win out. I mean, Galileo published a treatise where he bought into Nicholas Copernicus's notion that the earth revolved around the sun. He did. And that was against the teachings, or at least the interpretation of the Bible by the Roman Catholic Church at the time, which was that the earth was the center of the firmament. So he was brought up in front of a Roman Catholic tribunal in the 1600s and forced to recant his statement that the earth revolved around the sun. And he did. But as he left the tribunal, he looked back and said in Italian, and yet it still moves. Meaning, you can get me to recant this, but it doesn't change the fact that the earth still revolves around the sun. And that's true here too. I think no matter how many times Robert F. Kennedy Jr. over the next 2+ years that he's in office, or Donald Trump says over the next 2+ years that vaccines cause autism or diabetes or multiple sclerosis or attention deficit disorder or hyperactivity, he's wrong. And it doesn't matter how many discredited physicians or discredited scientists or congressmen or media people he gets to back him up, he's still wrong. And science is a powerful thing to have on your side, so stand up for it. Know that it's behind you and know of its power.
Hi, this is Dr. Mickey Bouquet. I just want to say thank you so much for all the work you do. I feel like this is amazing that you're even here talking with us today. You're like such a big hero to me. I'm involved in vaccine advocacy and have given testimony against a lot of the anti-vaccine bills. Most recently, this last spring, we had a bill that wanted to remove the meningitis vaccine as a requirement for our teenagers. Thankfully, that bill did fail, and I think it was related to our testimony and having a meningitis survivor there. But I see that it's only going to get worse from here. And one of the things that surprised me is when I was giving my testimony, they asked if we were following the CDC's new guidelines. And I said, well, those weren't based on science. I'm following the AAP guidelines, and most pediatricians are doing that. And the politicians were kind of surprised. And I've also talked with other colleagues, and they're feeling like even when we mention being a part of the AAP, that now we're like a fringe group and that we're far left and kind of out of the box. And it's just kind of shocking to me. So I've had to change my testimony and focus on just being a pediatrician in Baton Rouge. And, I'm one of you, and this is what I see, and this is what I think is best. But do you have other tips? Do you see the future and what's going to happen with the anti-vaccine bills, and what can we do to be prepared to battle?
First of all, thank you for fighting the good fight. We need people like you on the front lines. Thank you. I would let's say a couple of things to make it feel a little better. First of all, you're not part of a fringe group. You're part of the mainstream. You are. I mean, even after this bill, was put forward, the next day the sun came up. People went to their parents took their children to pediatricians' offices, and the pediatricians followed the AP schedule because that's what most pediatricians do. Because the pediatricians know that the AP schedule, through their recommending body, the Committee of Infectious Diseases or the Red Book Committee, gives science-based advice. That is a science-based schedule. There is no CDC schedule that is RFK Jr.'s schedule, because when he proposed this at first on January the 5th, that was overturned. Remember when he posed, let's go from 17 to 10 vaccines, let's have these 3 as shared clinical decision-making, let's have these as high risk. That was all thrown out by a federal court on March the 16th. So there is no CDC schedule beyond, in terms of what RFK Jr. is promoting. The AAP has stood up for children, and that's why I love the AAP. When RFK Jr. stepped forward. This was like in May or something, and he said that we, meaning HHS, are no longer going to recommend the COVID vaccine for healthy young children, and we're no longer recommending the COVID vaccine for healthy pregnant women. That's what actually led to that lawsuit that was settled in March. And who stood up? The AP stood up, along with 4 other agencies, and they hired, Richard Hughes and his law firm out of Chicago to represent them in Boston. It's the AAP that's the mainstream because science is the mainstream. And I mean, I really respect Sue Cresley and now Dr. Racine, who as heads of the AAP have stood up. I mean, Sue Cresley, first of all, Sue Cresley's a Philadelphia Eagles season ticket holder, so don't mess around with these people. Remember, these are the same people that threw snowballs at Santa Claus. So RFK Jr. picked on the wrong gal. So you are the mainstream. Know that.
Hi, Paul. This is Joe Vocchini.
Hi, Joe.
How are you?
Good.
Are you holding up other than the cold?
Yeah, other than the cold. I don't think the cold's going to kill me, and I don't think anybody else is going to kill me.
Well, first I want to thank you for standing up for vaccines. Just like we have Sue Cresley here, so this could be something special for the Eagles next year. I don't know. But I think, so one, thank you for doing what you do. I think being out there in front is really important, and you've been a good beacon for us for a long time, so appreciate that.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that's also going on is you've had experience on NVAC and experience on with the charters of the ACIP and NVAC, and that's all being changed by RFK Jr. So this is even bigger in terms of trying to make the changes to maybe the compensation program, et cetera. What do you see in terms of what's going to happen in the next few months related to that and to try and get around the court order to prevent the current recommendations from going through?
Again, this executive order does not have the rule of law behind it. It's all up to the states to decide what to do. He can't mandate a vaccine schedule. That ultimately goes to the states in terms of how this plays out. So that's encouraging to me. I think here's my biggest fear. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. makes a lot of money out of this. He does. I mean, he gets money for every referral to the law firm of Wisner Baum, for whom his son works. He gets a kickback, and he made like $2.5 million roughly in the couple years before, since 2022, and more than $800,000 in the past year before he became Secretary of Health and Human Services. And Elizabeth Warren said, you have to give that up. You can't keep on the one hand, scaring people about vaccines to the point that some of them want to sue the vaccine maker and then make money from a referral, which he refused to do. He said he would give the money to his son. I mean, that's where he's coming from. So I think, so how does he really cash in? The way he really cashes in is he adds autism to the vaccine injury compensation program or something like that, which will break the program. And if he breaks that program, then we're right back to where we were in the 1980s. I don't know if you remember this, but in early 1980s was brought forward the false notion that the wholesale pertussis vaccine was causing permanent brain damage. That led to a flood of litigation, so that by 1985 we had $3.5 billion in litigation against pharmaceutical companies, which drove them off the market largely. And so Ronald Reagan thankfully stepped forward and created the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, which included the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, which included a 75-cent federal excise tax on every dose of vaccine that at least stopped the bleeding. At least you had to go through this program first. But in 1980, we had 18 companies that made vaccines. By 1990, we had 4. These companies will leave the business. Make it expensive enough, and they'll leave the business. And I think that's what scares me. And that's his goal. His goal is to eliminate vaccine manufacture for children in this country. He thinks vaccines are doing far more harm than good. He thinks he's on a mission, as he says, to prevent childhood chronic diseases. And he believes vaccines cause childhood chronic diseases. He does. He actually believes it. He also makes money off of it, but he believes it. So it makes him so dangerous. He's a scary guy. I don't think people, I mean, I guess he first called me about 20 years ago, so I've been sort of following his story for 20 years. He's a dangerous man, and I just don't think people realize how we're sort of sitting on this cliff. I do trust the states. When I see Governor Shapiro in our Commonwealth stand up and say, we're going to ignore this, good for him. And tell me, Joe, how's it going to play out in Louisiana?
So we're a red state. So it will play out a little differently. Mickey is a good example of what we need to do every year in the legislature. We need to go down and testify. I will tell you that once the first iteration of this reduction in number of vaccines came out in January, we polled the pediatricians within our state who are members of the Louisiana AAP. And those that responded, 98% of them said they would continue to follow the AAP recommendation. So you're absolutely right. That's where we are. And we will continue to do that. But I think fighting in the legislature is going to continue to be a really important effort that we got to make to keep the vaccine schedule the way it is, and especially for school requirements. I think they're going to be on the table this coming year. And again, based on the recommendations of the executive directive. So I think we're going to be fighting. It's going to be very different.
Well, sadly, I think the education is going to be done, or educating is going to be done in large part by these viruses and bacteria. I do. I think as much as we try to educate about the importance of vaccines and the danger of these diseases, the diseases themselves are doing the educating, sadly.
Yeah, because children are going to get hurt, continue to get hurt.
Good morning, Dr. Offit.
Hello, Dr. Offit. I had a chance to practice in the Philippines as a pediatrician, and I've seen really the worst case of measles, like measles with bronchopneumonia, with pneumatocysts and SSPE. So, and the MMR is not free. They have to pay it. So, but if they have to go to the rural health center, wherein the measles vaccine is free, it is a single antigen vaccine, and it's given at 9 months and at 12 months. Can you comment on that? Is it the future for the U.S.?
No, it is not the future for the U.S. We have a lot of experience. We had the first measles vaccine came in 1963, the mumps vaccine in 67, the last best measles vaccine in 68, the rubella vaccine in 69, the MMR vaccine as a combination in 71, and then it was altered in 79 to include an updated or a different rubella vaccine. So we have a lot of experience with that vaccine. And with that as a single dose vaccine, we had a dramatic decrease in measles. And then in the sort of between 89 and 91, we had outbreaks where there were as many as 50,000 hospitalizations and 160 deaths from measles. So with that, we had the second dose vaccine. Although if you look at those outbreaks, it was really mostly in children who didn't get vaccinated. So really that second dose is not a booster dose. It's more like a second chance to get a first dose. And with that, we eliminated measles. By the year 2000, we eliminated measles, the most contagious human infection in this country. We eliminated it. A tremendous success. The problem is, I think that not only did we eliminate measles, we eliminated the memory of measles. People don't remember how sick that virus can make you. I mean, you brought up SSPE, which occurs in maybe 1 per 100,000 children who get measles. And we may start to see that again. We're not quite at that level, but we might. But the other thing is immune amnesia. I mean, after you've gotten a natural measles infection, you can have immune suppression that puts you at risk for other diseases, including invasive bacterial diseases. I mean, you think about this, when about 2 weeks after that first child died in 2025, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was on national television on Fox News and said this. He said, measles vaccine causes blindness, measles vaccine causes deafness, measles vaccine kills people every year, and natural measles is a good thing because natural measles prevents cancer, prevents autoimmune disease, prevents heart disease. He just makes it up and nobody does anything. It's just so hard to watch. I mean, it should never, I mean, public health should never be, let me put it this way. Public health is always political because it requires resources, but it should never be partisan. But it's become partisan. I mean, where are the Republicans, man? I mean, they have kids. I know for a fact Republicans have kids because my parents were Republican.
So,
morning.
Dr. Offit, Dr. Karen Fody here from Louisiana, and a longtime listener, first-time caller. But I just wanted to say I'm a huge fan as well, and I'm an independent pediatrician in Louisiana. And when the executive order came through, I said, absolutely no, I will not do this. And in my practice, I have the luxury of saying, and I know this does kind of go against what AAP says, but I don't take non-vaxxers. I will work with a section if they want to separate them, but I can guarantee every parent who does split them up, they end up getting the whole series, and usually by the 6th month, they're like, yeah, just go ahead and give them, they're fine. So I don't have the time to have an hour's conversation with someone who tells me, well, I did my research. That's not something that I can do all day. So I made the decision that if you want to not vaccinate your children, my job is to protect your children, and if that's the way you want to go, we're not the practice for you. So wish you well and Godspeed, but we can't work with you. So I just wanted to also let you know, there's been a lot of stuff on the internet, the Coke bottle thing. There was a couple of doctors who got on right away, and I don't remember the doctor's name, but I did post it on my Facebook page and Instagram. She took a little syringe of each vaccine and put them into a bottle, and how little it actually added up to. So if anybody wants to refute that on their own pages, please feel free to borrow the doctor's information, because I thought it was brilliant. Because once I heard the Coke bottle thing, I'm like, first of all, I don't see him even seeing his kids getting vaccinated, going to the doctor with his own children, let alone, oh, I saw a child get injected with a bottle of Coke. It was ridiculous. But I just want to say thank you for all the work you do. We're going to keep fighting the fight here, and our goal is to protect children. We're staying with the AAP, and that's who's going to be directing my scientific practices, not RFK or Trump. So
yeah, and the AAP needs to stand up. I know Dr. Racine was on national television recently. Sue has been, and this is the time to stand up. I mean, to be clear and definitive and stand up, because that's what you need to do here. There is no middle ground here. I've watched my wife, who's in private practice pediatrics. I'm not a private practicing pediatrician. I'm an ID guy, but she did the best she could to get children vaccinated, and then she basically had it, and she said, "Look, let me love your child. Don't put me in a position where you're asking me to send this child out of this office when I know that the child could come back, sick or hospitalized or worse. Knowing that measles is out there, knowing that whooping cough is out there, knowing that that flu is out there, chickenpox is out there, pneumococcus is out there, Hib cases are going up. I can't do it. Don't put me in that position. I can't be in a position where I know that I'm practicing lesser care. Please don't do that." And she became much more convincing because she found that sort of same level, right? Let me love your child.
Good morning, Dr. Offit. Terry Chujitarum. I've attended several of your talks over the years, and I find them very informative and entertaining. Have you ever thought of maybe doing some social media videos with, say, Dr. Glockenflecken or anything like that?
He's funnier than me.
My question is, it's something that I run into a lot, is trying to prove the negative. Tell me how you would approach that. They always ask, how do I know, this vaccine won't hurt my child? Or my other child didn't get this and he's fine. Sort of like proving the negatives is tough. So how do you approach it? Yeah, it is.
You can't prove the negative. That's the problem. I mean, the way that the way the scientific method works is regarding MMR and autism, that you form a null hypothesis, which is to say that MMR does not cause autism. You can either reject that hypothesis or not reject it, but you can never accept it. You can never accept the null hypothesis. So, I mean, the example that I use is, when I was a child, I used to watch the television show Superman, the one with George Reeves or Christopher Reeves. And Superman flew. He put his hands in front of him with that sort of interlocking thumb grip, and he had the cape behind him, and he looked at the city below, and he flew. So when you're 5, television doesn't lie. So I got outside in the back, stood on a small chair, and put a towel around my neck, and put my hands in front of me with that interlocking thumb grip, and jumped off and didn't fly. Tried a couple times. Didn't fly. Now, I could have done it 1,000,000 times. I could have done it 1,000,000,000 times. Each time I tried unsuccessfully, that would have made it all the more statistically unlikely. And that's where you are with the MMR and autism story. You've had 24 separate studies involving hundreds of thousands of children that have shown that there is not a single study that shows when do the right controls, meaning control for family history, control for medical background, control for health care seeking behavior, control for socioeconomic background. So you isolate the effect of that one variable, receipt of the MMR vaccine, and every study has shown the same thing. But that doesn't make it impossible. I mean, you can't prove that I wasn't sort of transported down to this chair from an alien ship an hour before this meeting started. You can't prove that. So so try and make those analogies, I guess, is the best you can do. But that's the anti-vaccine trope. You know, it's, yeah, sure, you're saying that, but this would happen to my child.
Thank you.
Dr. Offit, hey, I'm John Van Cherry, PEDS ID, at LSU in Shreveport. And my concern is that parents who choose not to vaccinate don't have any skin in the game. They want authority for decision, but not responsibility for what happens of the decision. And so is there any appetite yet for insurance companies not to cover vaccine preventable illnesses when parents choose not to, or, you know, take that road and make sure they have a bill from the public health agency when it costs $40 million to handle an outbreak of measles? Send the parents the bill.
You were that child who in the western part of the country, maybe in Colorado, who had tetanus and was hospitalized for a while. And then the parents still wouldn't get a tetanus vaccine after having spent, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars, or the government spent hundreds of thousands of dollars taking care of the child. I don't think so. I mean, it just ends up punishing the child. I think the one thing I would like to see is I'd like to see us be more emotional about this, meaning to tell those emotional stories. So, I mean, you can go through all the numbers of measles cases or whooping cough cases or flu cases, but you need to feel it. So, for example, there's a woman, and Sue Kresley, I'm sure knows her, named Alyssa Kanowitz, who's the head of the Amanda Kanowitz Foundation. And she gets up in front of the public, and I followed her at one of these Montgomery County immunization coalitions, Sue, and she says she chose not to vaccinate her child against flu. Now, then she shows a series of videos of her beautiful little 4-year-old daughter interacting with friends, family, relatives, and then she tells a story of what it was like to watch her child die of flu. No one who was sitting in that audience wasn't crying, including me. I mean, it's just those are powerful stories. The problem is it's extremely hard to get parents to tell that story. I think the reason is that, first of all, the worst thing in the world is to lose a child. The only thing worse than that is that you had something to do with it. I mean, I'll give you a perfect example of what I mean. There was, in 2009, during the swine flu pandemic, there was a mother of 4 who vaccinated 3 of her children but didn't vaccinate the 4th. And so the child who was unvaccinated came into the hospital with flu and was initially on face mask oxygen in the emergency department, then goes up to the floor, CPAP, ICU, ventilator, oscillator, heart-lung machine for like a couple months, lived but barely, and had, you know, because of bouts of hypoxemia, had some residual brain damage. So I asked her when it was over how she would describe her experiences to friends or family. And she said, I am glad I didn't vaccinate him. If I'd vaccinated him, it would have been much worse. Because how do you live with yourself otherwise? To think that you did that. You can't, you look at those two groups of parents in West Texas. Well, the Hildebrands, the father got up, Daisy Hildebrand's father got up and said he was angry at the hospital. And same thing with this measles case, this measles encephalitis case in Pennsylvania. The mother was angry that the hospital wasn't doing enough to treat her child. Prevent the disease, for goodness sake. Give the vaccine when this was a child. It's just hard to watch. It really is hard to watch this. But I do think we have to, the Alyssa Kanowitz Foundation is a perfect example of what we need to do better, is to get those stories out there. They're emotional stories, and emotional stories are compelling.
Hello, Dr. Offit. My name is Margaret Mena. I'm one of the residents from LSU Pediatrics in New Orleans. I was looking at your bio, and it seems like you wrote a good amount of books. Is there one that you would recommend to aid, like, the general pediatrician in talking with our families about these vaccines, or about vaccines? I know that there are several about, like, public health and everything. Is there one that you think would be really beneficial for us to read?
I think probably the best among them would be Deadly Choices, How the Anti-Vaccine Movement Threatens Us All. That was written years ago, but it has some of the bright themes. I have another book that's coming out by University of California Press that's called The Nobel Delusion, which is the subtitle of which what to do when even Nobel or award-winning scientists, or what to do when even experts, world-renowned experts, give dangerous advice. And so that's sort of how to think through where to get the best advice. I mean, the really book is about where to get your best advice. But the one I'm working on now that I was just cathartic, if nothing else, is called The Falconer, because it's about RFK Jr. and the subtitle is, Will RFK Jr.'s Make America Healthy Again movement make us healthier? The answer is no, by the way. If you don't want, you want to skip reading the book, there, you get the short version.
Good morning, Dr. Offit. My name is Andrew Joseph. I am just an intern and very, very, very early in my career. Don't know if I can even call it a career yet, but nevertheless, was going to ask, I've had a pediatrician who I've been seeing, not right now because I'm an adult, but I recently heard that she retired, and she had been genuinely unbiased, of course, the best pediatrician ever. 30 plus years, just stand-up woman, always defending, can go on and on about her. I asked her what was the reason why she retired, and it actually alludes to the Instagram post that you had mentioned, which was, I'm tired of having to explain all of these things. So she retired because she couldn't handle the constant questions. As someone who's going into this world of pediatrics as part of the cohort that's the next generation, what advice do you have for my consortium to be able to mitigate the burnout? I know it's kind of a word that's tossed around maybe a little too loosely, but I mean, truthfully, I am concerned for my cohorts and myself as well. What advice do you have to try to minimize that burnout and maybe promote that mental health to be able to do the beneficence and do no harm for their patients? Thank you.
Well, you're on a noble mission. I mean, you are there to protect the child. You're the child's advocate. And so you have to go through the parents to be a child advocate. And you do the best you can. I mean, you can't go in with a notion that if you don't convince a parent to get a vaccine, that you failed that child, because this will drive you crazy. So you just do the best you can. Every time you see a family, you do the best you can because you love that child and you want that child to have the best life possible. And at least health-wise, that's your job. And so just hang in there. Don't let it get you down, and have realistic goals. This will work out. It will. Science does win out in the end. So I firmly believe that we will get through all this. I do. I think it's grotesque what's going on now. And I think it's so evidently grotesque that people will see it that way at some level. I mean, what was interesting is that listening to the anti-vaccine people sort of muse about Donald Trump's press conference. They were angry at him that he didn't have data to support his, even bad data, the usual bad data that held up. I mean, he's the head of the federal government. You have RFK Jr. is the head of the most powerful public health agency in this world. Where's the studies to back this executive order? Where's one study to back what this executive order said? Not one. I mean, it's like, RFK Jr. can rail about people like me. I'm not his problem. It's the science that continues to show he's wrong. That's his problem. So in any case, hang in there. Science is on your side. You're the child's advocate. Children need advocates. I think for me, the passion comes from the fact that I was in a polio ward as a child. I mean, I didn't have polio. I had a failed operation on my right foot that landed me in a polio ward for 6 weeks. But I saw children with iron lungs. I saw the Sister Kenny hot pack treatments. It was a Dickens-like experience. There was one visiting hour a week. And I think when I see children in the hospital, at some level, I see myself. And I think that the passions of our adulthood often come from the scars of our childhood. And I think that's where I'm at in this.
Just to follow up on that, I'm Alex Wright. I'm a hospitalist. And to give a little encouragement, I don't have a question for Dr. Offit, but I had a patient when I was a resident at LSU, and they were in the ICU on pressor support, fluids, all the things because of not getting the rotavirus vaccine, and having severe rotavirus illness. And I remember I was a resident, so when it was out of the ICU period when we were on the floor, and I don't remember the exact conversation, but I do remember telling the mother that this could have been prevented by a vaccine, and she hadn't heard that yet, or maybe just it hadn't set in yet. And she just looked at me and she was like, you could tell she finally realized it. And she was like, oh my gosh, this could have not all happened. And I said yes. And we actually gave the vaccines, whatever vaccines the child hadn't gotten before they left the hospital. So just to give you that encouragement that just try to keep up with it. Unfortunately, on the other side, I've had a child die from pertussis this past year, and that was because the mother hadn't received her Tdap vaccination during, pregnancy. So there are the ups and downs, but I think the positives definitely outshadow those negative experiences. So just keep up with it. But thank y'all.
No, that's a really good point. To the young pediatrician's point before, is that celebrate the successes, enjoy the successes, knowing they're not always going to be successes. Right.
Good morning, Dr. Offit. I'm what you would call a senior pediatrician, and I love pediatrics. I love my patients, but it was my mother who taught me the real lesson. She was 40 when she had me, then my sister. And I remember Mama taking my sister and I to get polio vaccines. Now, I think we got 3 polio vaccines. I have no idea. It was pretty often because Mama saw her neighbor's son develop polio. He lived, and that was, I guess, that visual. My mother, God bless her, I can remember us going to the health unit, and years later, I think Mama did what she had to do because she loved us, and she had a faith. And since becoming a pediatrician, I've loved most of my patients. And then we are a privileged group, and it really doesn't matter to me what people say negative, because if my mom had not persisted, I want to be the representative for my children that my mother was. Now, so Mama had me when she was 43, and my 41, and then my sister came 3 years later. So we are still quite fashionable as we were the children of an older mother, and we're proud, and we all should be proud of when we get the opportunity to stand and say, I'm going to vaccinate your child, and if you don't like it, you need to leave. That's practice. Personal opinion.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you.
Hey, Paul, it's Sue Goobirds. Thanks so much for being a partner in this work and for really standing truth to power. You're in a position where you can do it. Some people are not. And so you, like I, will continue to speak up for people who can't necessarily say out loud what they are doing. That doesn't mean that you can't advocate one at a time in the exam room and do what's right for your families. I have one question for you in the Vaccine Education Center at CHOP. Are we at a place where we need to really show parents, if they choose not to vaccinate, that their care needs to be different? We have heard about now a case where someone was reported to their medical board, state licensing board of their state, because their child was not vaccinated, and they said, we can't safely see your unvaccinated 2-month-old in the office with a fever. You have to go to the ER. And the parents complained that they were picking on them for being unvaccinated, when in reality we know that's a child who may need a spinal tap and a blood culture and all of the things that we wouldn't necessarily do for a vaccinated child. So I'm just wondering what CHOP's plans are, the vaccine education plans are, if you choose not to vaccinate. Good care looks like this, which is different than what good care looks like if your child is fully vaccinated.
Right. So the Vaccine Education Center educates. We don't set policy for the hospital. But no, it's a really good point. I mean, when I was a resident in the late 70s at Children's in Pittsburgh, we would have these 12-hour on, 12-hour off emergency department shifts. I would do 2 to 3 spinal taps a night, right? Didn't have a pneumococcal vaccine, didn't have a Hib vaccine, didn't have a meningococcal vaccine. Now, most residents in our hospital don't do spinal taps. They don't know how to do them. It goes to the interventional radiologist. But we're getting there. You're right. I mean, you know, because we used to handle fever in a young child much differently before those 3 vaccines came out. And so what now? You definitely are seeing more cases of Hib. That's clear. I haven't seen for meningococcus or pneumococcus, but then you have our president of the United States saying that he wants to make, meningococcus essentially just for high-risk groups. I'm sorry, who are those high-risk groups? Anybody can get a meningococcal disease. So I guess we'll see how this plays out. It's interesting. It's punishing to the parent, obviously, to do that, but I don't know. I'm not sure the answer to that question. It certainly would get people's attention if that became a policy for a hospital practice.
Thank you, Dr. Offit. We're at time. We cannot thank you enough for taking your time to be with us here.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
Thank you very much. And we are especially grateful to have 2 of the greats, Susan Cressley and Paul Offit. Thank you very much. You have a great day.